For me, what's really important about the Eucharist is that it provides us an opportunity for an encounter. And when you think about the encounter, this is really the heart of Christianity in certain ways. When you read the scriptures, for example, how does a person become a disciple? Well, they have an encounter with Jesus. And you think about some of those stories in the Bible, for example, maybe in John chapter 1, where Andrew and John, the first apostles, they meet Jesus. And John the Baptist points to them and says, "Behold the Lamb of God," and they follow him. And then Jesus turns and he looks at them and he says, "What are you seeking?" And they say, "Master, where are you staying?" And he says, "Come and see." Now, we don't know what happened that day when they spent that day with Jesus, but we know that after that day, Andrew went and found his brother Peter and said, "We have found the Messiah." And we know that he was always with Jesus after that day. And we know from other encounters in the scriptures, we can see what happened. What happened was he discovered that Jesus had this divine aspect to him, this answer to the deepest questions of his heart, that Jesus was the one he was seeking, the Messiah. And this is the beauty of what the Eucharist offers us. And our Holy Father, Pope Francis, teaches about this in his apostolic letter on the liturgy. He says, for us, a vague memory of the Paschal mystery, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, wouldn't be enough. We need an encounter. We need to be able to hear his voice. We need to be able to eat his body and drink his blood. We need to actually encounter the living person of Jesus. Because if Christianity is not about that encounter, he says it's about nothing. It begins with this encounter with the living person of Jesus, which is why I believe one of the reasons why Jesus left us his presence in the Eucharist, in the Mass, and in adoration, so that we could encounter him, really him, alive, here, and so that we could discover he's the answer to the deepest questions of my heart. And of course, that encounter in our life, it doesn't just happen once. It's meant to happen every time we go to Mass, every time we go to adoration. And it's actually meant to deepen over the years. So if you ask me, how did that happen in my life? I can tell you, from a very young age, when I was serving at Mass and I was kneeling there near the altar, I experienced Jesus' presence. I experienced that Jesus was here and I wanted to be close to him. Now that was in the simple way that a second grader experiences that, or a first grader, right? But it was a real experience for me that then gradually began to deepen as I began to know Jesus, and I discovered more and more I could meet him here, and that he was really here, and that he wanted to share with me his life, his love, all that he is through the Eucharist. I do remember a very important moment in my own growth in that encounter. And it was a very interesting experience for me because I had always believed in the presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. But as I was approaching being ordained a priest, in fact, in the very months before I was ordained a priest, I had this strange thought that occurred to me. Well, I've always believed it was really Jesus there on the altar when someone else said those words. But what would it be like when I said those words? Would I believe? I remember very well what happened, actually, when I was there at my first Mass at the Cathedral of St. Paul in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I took the host in my hands and I said those words for the first time as a priest, even though I had said them before in practice. When I said them that first time as a priest, and then I raised up the host, and then I laid it down on the altar, and then I genuflected, I had no doubt in my mind that I was genuflecting before the Lord of the universe, and that the Lord of the universe was inviting me to encounter him and to be transformed by him, to allow my life to become an offering as his life had become. And this is really the great gift of the Eucharist. It's the encounter that never ends. It's the encounter that keeps transforming us. And it's the encounter that as we surrender our lives to it, begins to want to make our lives like Jesus' life. So that I too learn from this presence at the Eucharist that I'm called to make my life a gift for others, because the Eucharist is fundamentally Jesus giving himself to us, and I'm called to imitate that. But I think we wouldn't ever be able to do that if we didn't begin with the truth of that encounter with him.